TNN's exclusive coverage of the Daytona 200 is brought to you by...
In 1995, Smith was part of the Ducati effort, along with Fast by Ferracci teammate Freddie Spencer, the Pro Motor Team's Troy Corser, and world champion Carl Fogarty. This year, the Italian makes hopes rest again on Corser and former Honda rider Mike Hale. Corser is, of course, the 1994 AMA Superbike champion with Ferracci, while Hale arrives fresh from 2 wins and a 1995 Series runner-up aboard a Honda.
Next to your mom when you set that time, and I asked her, is that going to be a ladies Rolex? And she said, I don't know, I hope so. How'd it go in those conditions? That was pretty spectacular.
Yeah, of course. It was a lot more difficult with that headwind down the front chute, but it was a fairly strong tailwind down the back straight, so made it quite interesting getting into that back chicane a few times. Obviously, you know yourself how fast you get in there, especially with the tailwind, so I feel I could have went a little bit quicker maybe even than the time I done, but we'll wait and see what happens. I was happy enough.
This is the real thing. The flag is down for the Daytona 200 by a ride. The question in the next hours will be answered. Can Scott Russell win number 4?
It's a ride to third. Gobert now moving to the outside on the big green Kawasaki. That's going to open the door for Corser to try to sneak to the bottom. Russell sits in 4th. Colin Edwards behind him, then Miguel Duhamel, and behind him comes Mike Smith.
If you're not familiar with 96 Anthony Gobert, he's a past Australian Superbike champion and is famous for his total abandon, a very aggressive style of riding that should be fun to watch.
That's one rider who loves to slide that big rear wheel. And look at Corser now diving to the bottom side as they get the run down the backstretch.
So Troy Corser on the Ducati, which is quite a bit bigger, 955 cc's compared to 750 for everything else. It gets that advantage because it's a 2-valve bike. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Right now, here they come into the chicane.
They've won this race 3 times. That list includes Brad Andrus, Dick Clamforth, Roger Riemann, and Kenny Roberts.
What about Freddie Spencer?
Freddie Spencer, Old Fast Freddie, only picked it up 1 time in 1985 on the Honda.
Thank you, Mr. Stats. Continuing to execute
2-wheel racing. So when a guy like Scott Russell gets his name added to the list, that's why it's so important to these guys. And that's why Troy Corser wants his name. Prestigious motorcycle race in the world. And we're happy to be able to bring it to you.
And Troy Corser is certainly happy to be here on that number 3 Ducati, just sailing along. And so far, Scott Russell's predictions of doom haven't happened.
They have worked really hard on the Ducati to get it ready as they go around the number 13 bike of Steve DeCamp. One of the things they knew they had a problem with was reliability, and the Ducati team spent probably as much, if not more time than anybody else over here at Daytona testing with Corser CCGP win. Troy Corser is going to go back overseas and run this Pro Motor Ducati on the World Superbike Tour, looking to win that championship. And he has really had a set plan on how he wants his career to go, Steve, from Australia to the U.S. crown to the World crown, and he's even thinking maybe next year he'll be ready for the 500cc ranks as well.
Well, one pressure that Corser and Russell do not have is scoring points towards the AMA 96 Superbike Championship. They're not coming back anyway. They don't much care, unlike Duhamel and many of the others.
And that's one thing you know Miguel is thinking about right now, too. Because if he can finish inside the top 3 in this thing, obviously he wants to win. But if he finishes anywhere inside the top 3, he's coming out of Daytona with a lot of points as the Tour heads west. Look at the closing problems. We talked about that earlier. Did you see how quickly Corser closed up on these slower riders here and how difficult it was for him to get on the brakes? Now he's got to follow them through the chicane and then blast on past.
Very similar to the problems they have in the 24 hours of Daytona, where you've got cars of many different classes out there, and a 200-mile-an-hour car is closing on a 100-mile-an-hour car, and it makes it real interesting.
Absolutely. And the only other rider in that top 5 that is an AMA regular is Aaron Yates, who is in his first.
Number 3, Troy Corser, pulling into his pit. First scheduled stop for Troy Corser. Be a full service here. Front, rear tires, 6 gallons of fuel. Little problem getting the front wheel off, mounted it backwards. They switch it around, get it back in. Little bit of a delay for Troy Corser.
You know, I think that front wheel was rolled because he put it maybe 4 or 5 laps earlier.
Oh!
Whoa, Corser.
Big problems for Troy Corser as he has a problem just as they get set to go up onto the banking once again. Corser's going to rejoin.
Let's have another look at this. An amazing job.
Field like this. Obviously, not everybody in that 80-rider field is on the same level of a Troy Corser or a Scott Russell. So there's a lot of guys who are regional riders who have made their way down to Daytona. Riders of Sean Higby and Larry Pegram get used to these two rider setups.
And speaking of Mike Hale, he will not rejoin the fight. A broken water pump casting on his Ducati, and he's sitting on the wall, a spectator. We'll be back to Daytona right after this.